Good evening. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday evening. I hope you have been continuing to share these videos and to try to reach out to your friends and things like that. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm holding a book in my hand, and I'll turn it around there just so you can get a look at that. It's a pretty cool book. The title of this book is Sinking of the Titanic, the World's Greatest Sea Disaster, Official Edition. If you open this up, it's got a man's name in the front that's been written in there, and it says June 4th, 1912. The copyright on this book is 1912. In 2012, I was in school at the East Tennessee School of Preaching, and one of my teachers, James Meadows, had this book on his shelf. And around that time, my son Logan was a Titanic nut. And James very graciously gave Logan that book, which is pretty cool, a 1912 copy of that book. You may not know this, but today is April the 15th. Well, you probably know that. And it just so happens this year we're not talking about tax deadlines, so we can use this day to talk about something else. And what I want us to talk about for just a minute is the sinking of the Titanic. Just so happens that April the 15th was the day that the Titanic sunk. At 2:20 a.m. on April the 15th, 1912, the British ocean liner Titanic sinks into the North Atlantic Ocean about 400 miles south of Newfoundland, Canada. The massive ship, which carried 2,200 passengers and crew, had struck an iceberg 2.5 hours before. On April the 10th, the RMS Titanic, one of the largest and most luxurious ocean liners ever built, departed Southampton, England on its maiden voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. The Titanic was designed by Irish shipbuilder William Parry and built in Belfast and was thought to be the world's fastest ship. It spanned 883 feet from stern to bow, and its hull was divided into 16 compartments that were presumed to be watertight. Because 4 of these compartments could be flooded without causing critical loss of buoyancy, the Titanic was considered to be unsinkable. While leaving port, the ship came within a couple of feet of the steamer, the New York, but passed safely by, causing a general sigh of relief from the passengers massed on the Titanic's decks. On its first journey across the highly competitive Atlantic ferry route, the ship carried some 2,200 passengers and crew. After stopping at Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, to pick up some final passengers, the massive vessel set out at full speed for New York City. However, just before midnight on April the 14th, the RMS Titanic failed to divert its course from an iceberg and ruptured at least 5 of its hull compartments. These compartments filled with water and pulled down the bow of the ship. Because the Titanic's compartments were not capped at the top, water from the ruptured compartments filled each succeeding compartment, causing the bow to sink and the stern to be raised up to an almost vertical position above the water. Then the Titanic broke in half. And about 2:20 a.m. on April the 15th, stern and bow sank to the ocean floor. Because of a shortage of lifeboats and the lack of satisfactory emergency procedures, more than 1,500 people went down in the sinking ship or froze to death in the icy North Atlantic waters. Most of the 700 or so survivors were women and children. A number of notable American and British citizens died in the tragedy, including noted British journalist William Thomas Stead and heirs to the Strauss, Astor, and Guggenheim fortunes. The unsinkable ship had sunk. I don't think that God sank the Titanic any more than he brought the coronavirus on us today. However, I do think that we can see things that are going on around us, and we can learn lessons from those things. How many cases do you know of that are similar to this incident with our Titanic? It was supposed to be an unsinkable ship. How many empires, how many men have there come along that were thought to be the greatest ever, and some tragedy fell upon that person or that country, or in this case, upon this unsinkable ship? You see, it was sinkable after all. In Obadiah chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, we've got a people here who thought they were unsinkable, so to speak. But this is what God has to say. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be greatly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who dwell in the cleft of the rocks, whose habitation is high. You who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you ascend as high as the eagle, and though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, says the Lord. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12, that familiar verse that says, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. You see, we're supposed to take careful consideration of the fact that we can fall, that we can be brought down. And Romans chapter 3, Romans chapter 12 and verse 3, I think sums this up pretty well in a good way that we need to think about it. This is what Paul writes in Romans 12:3. He says, for I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. That's the key, friends. We're supposed to think soberly. We're supposed to recognize the fact that we can make mistakes, that we can fall, that we can be brought down. And if we realize those things, we're going to be prepared for the trials, the tribulations, the stormy waters that come along, the things that we're going to be dealing with and that we're going to have to face. We're going to be ready when those things come along. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Friends, we need to think soberly and carefully, recognize the fact that we can be brought down, allow God to humble you in this life, and he will lift you up in the next. I want to thank you for tuning in. Pray that you'll be able to get something out of these thoughts, make some application, find some encouragement, share it with your friends. Thank you, and I pray that you have a blessed evening.